Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Great Shot, Kid, the Nerd Party's podcast that's focused on the technical wizardry and inspirational points for filmmakers all across the firmament. I'm John.
And I'm Mike.
And this week we are going to be looking at the sports movie, the continuing quest of Mike to turn me into a baseball fan, Moneyball. But before we get to that, of course, you're here on the Nerd Party Network. You can go to thenerdparty.com and find a show to suit just about any fandom need that you have. Everything from Doctor Who to Star Wars to just general film knowledge stuff and all of those sorts of fun things. And you can also find the network over on Twitter at Join Nerd Party, the Nerd Party on Instagram. You can go to facebook.com/the Nerd Party. And if you want to drop a line to the show, you can use the hashtag GreatShotKid on the social networks or drop us a line at thenerdparty.com/contact. So, again, thank you for joining us as we continue on Mike's daunting task to turn me maybe into a baseball fan. And Moneyball is the latest salvo for anybody who's been keeping up. We started with a discussion about For Love of the Game. And For the Love of the Game takes us to Moneyball. And Mike very, very generously and very sweetly made sure I got a copy of an audiobook of Moneyball. Loved the book. And he also got me a copy of the film. And so that's our starting point. So Moneyball, if anybody's not familiar, is a film about the way baseball basically has come to be run, where they figured out the statistics that really judge how productive a baseball player is and what you're really paying for. And it boils down to math. You're paying for on-base percentage, and as attractive as it is to look for home runs and to look for the guy who has the right type of swagger or a good smile in front of the camera, you don't care about walks or, you care about, can he get on base? And if he can get on base, then he can bring in your runs and you're guaranteed. And if I'm getting this right, I'm trying to remember, if you go back to the Bill James baseball abstract, you start with X number of wins that you're pretty much going to get no matter what, just because of the law of averages. And then what you're paying for in your payroll is the amount of money per game above that number that you have to pay. So when you have somebody like the New York Yankees, who historically has had one of the most gigantic payrolls of all time, say $100 million or whatever per season, they're paying $3 million per extra win. Whereas what the Oakland Athletics did with Billy Beane is they figured out how to pay $10,000 per extra win or something like that, because they had a much smaller payroll, and it was by switching their focus from the type of stats traditionally looked for in baseball to these stats that had more to do with being on base. Am I stating that correctly?
Yeah, pretty much. Essentially, because of history and because of, people's biases and everything like that, there were certain stats which were valued and certain stats which were not valued. And through math, they figured out that people were essentially evaluating players incorrectly, and they figured out how to correctly evaluate players in an attempt to sort of buy the undervalued players and compete with the teams that had tons of money that they could just throw at any problem that they have. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because the Yankees, it was always pretty much guaranteed. I toyed with a baseball fandom in the past, and it was pretty much accepted that, when you got around the time of the trade deadline and the All-Star break, basically the Yankees would watch the All-Star break, and then they would go and they would just pay a truckload of money for people that looked like they could hit 200 more home runs or something like that. Of course, nobody's hit 200 home runs. I'm exaggerating for effect, but it's an interesting exercise with this, because For Love of the Game romanticizes baseball very much. Romanticizes, the hero story of it, and the mental discipline and what's going on in the players' lives and all of that sort of thing. Is very much a love letter to baseball in a lot of ways. Whereas Moneyball, the book, is I think a really fascinating tour through the psyche of somebody trying to figure out how to game a system. But the movie is I really like the movie, but it has this weird sterile quality to it in a lot of ways. And I was wondering, do you get the same impression with that? And do you think that that has to do with the source material being different, what they're looking at being different? Or do you think that this is just the opinion of the filmmaker trying to be detached and more documentarian, as it were?
I definitely see what you're saying, but at the same time, like, I never thought that, because if the version of Moneyball that almost got made would have gotten made, it would have been even more sterile, like 10 times more sterile. And that, when that movie didn't happen, it just broke my heart. And when I look at this, all I see is kind of like Hollywood schmaltz,
Okay.
in a sense. Like, why are we talking about his daughter? Who cares, Oh, this event isn't exactly the way that this played out, and it's much more sort of like everything is done for dramatic effect, whereas originally it was going to be like the Moneyball of movies, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, I mean, I guess you can say that. Like, I really love the music in this movie, and like, that's one of the things which it's like constantly like building up to like this emotional crescendo. And then like when it reaches that crescendo, it cuts to like someone waiting for statistics to print on a printer. You know what I mean? Like, literally that happens in the movie. And it's like, okay, all right. And we never even see what's on that paper. It's just like, this is the job, is looking at numbers. We barely see any actual baseball action, because it doesn't really matter. What matters is, how the team is assembled. Yeah. So I definitely see what you're saying, but I never think about it because I always think about the movie that was never made.
Well, that would be, I think that would have been more interesting too, because I think you definitely wind up with a movie where you can feel by the end of it that pull back and forth between the two things, because since it doesn't commit to either one, when they do try to have like an emotion, like the emotional payoff ending of look at what they accomplished and Billy's going to stick with the team and everything's great, it doesn't. You don't feel any sort of like swell of emotion or pride or like fist pumping where you're like, yeah, Billy's staying with them and they're gonna succeed. It's just, okay, it's over now, which I think works very much if you're watching it and you understand that what this is talking about is strict, like this isn't about Billy Bean's human story. Like there's very much a part of me that wishes they hadn't even cut to his past but referenced it. Because in the book they talk about Billy Bean's past. He was a hot prospect coming into the big leagues, wrestled with the idea. His mother wasn't necessarily, in love with it. He could have, going to Stanford and stuff like that. And because they evaluated him incorrectly and they didn't, if you will, mentor him appropriately when he first came into the big leagues, he flames out. He has a big splashy start. And then, I mean, anybody who's familiar with, with football, American football for our international listeners, knows too well the highly drafted quarterback rookie who has a great first season or first half of a first season and then just completely bottoms out and just hasn't taken the time to develop, and the career flames out. A very easy recent example would be RG3, Robert Griffin III. For anybody who follows football, he had he had rookie of the year. He was on fire. He ran everywhere. Defenses didn't know how to cover him. It was all of these, different, the play option and all of that stuff. And then his second season where he, the second season that he starts is just completely bottoms out.
Yeah. Although with Billy Bean, it was even more so because he, it's almost like, I don't know, maybe Johnny Manziel or something like that, where it's
that's a good point. Yeah.
Like, oh my God, look at how good he is in college. He is going to be, a Hall of Famer when he gets to the pros. And then he gets to the pros and he is terrible. And he's out of the pros in minutes,
Heath Schuler would be another from my own home team. That's another
Yeah.
great example of a guy who gets drafted high and then just done.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things which, Billy Beane as a general manager tries to do is increase the odds that the people who he's drafting will succeed, So, and
Yeah.
he's gotten very good at that. I mean, one of the interesting things about the book, which we were talking about off mic, is, now that time has passed, now that it's been 15 years,
Yeah.
we can see exactly how well Billy Beane's strategy worked. Like, which are the players that he went after that succeeded, and which are the ones that didn't? Which ones did he pass on that became stars, and which ones, did he have the opportunity to get, but he passed on and he should have passed on? Which ones did he make the right call on? And it's interesting, he had hits and misses too, for sure. And I mean, I guess, as far as, one of the messages in the movie, like, it doesn't matter unless you win the last game of the season.
Right.
He still hasn't done that. But he's still there. He's still in Oakland. He's still the GM. So he's still trying.
So my question becomes this, though, because once this secret sauce comes out, the Boston Red Sox adopt it, arguably, because they bring in Theo Epstein, and they win their first World Series championship since Babe Ruth left town. I remember because it happened the year I got married. And I have a friend who's a Boston area native, and he was in my bridal party, and he was like conflicted. He was like, "Oh no, please don't let this interfere with your wedding," sort of thing. And fortunately, it didn't. But it was basically, haven't teams figured out how to then turn, like, once the agents figure out what stats you're looking at, doesn't it just sort of become a wash? Doesn't everybody adapt, and then the salary discrepancy still plays out?
Well, there's two components to it. On the one side, the answer is yes. There are, because when he was doing this, he wasn't the only person who was doing it. He may have been the person who was best at it, but there were other teams which had adopted it or were starting to adopt it, like the Red Sox. And when the book came out, Bean, who was kind of like, whatever, I'll tell you everything. Who cares? Right? Which, you would think he would be smart enough not to do that.
Yeah.
A lot of the other teams were like, I cannot believe that he gave away our secret. And now everyone is going to be looking for that stuff, and now it's going to be that much harder for us to buy these players. But the other side of it is there are still a lot of teams who don't subscribe to these ideas. They don't think he's right. I mean, you hear his voice in the movie a couple times. Once I think it might be a voice actor who's playing him essentially, but Joe Morgan, Joe Morgan is a guy, he's an announcer on, he does like the Sunday night game of the week, or at least he used to. He's not very good at announcing, but he is adamantly opposed to the idea of Moneyball. He talked about how terrible the book was, and you could tell that he hadn't read it. Like, he talked about how Billy Beane wrote this book called Moneyball and everything like that, and it's like, you're not really helping yourself. And then, he absolutely hates it. And it's become sort of a thing, like an old school versus new school. Like, there's a show on the MLB network where you have this guy, Brian Kenny, who's a statistician, sort of dude, who always, like, he's got his own show called, I think it's called, like, The Shredder, where, like, he basically takes, like, all these weird stats and, like, throws them into the computer and spits it out to, like, come up with these, weird theories. And then you've got Harold Reynolds, who's the old school baseball player, who believes in small ball and all that stuff. And they have, like, a show where the two of them basically just debate, old school versus new school in terms of, playing, strategies and stuff like that. So there are definitely, I mean, when the White Sox, the Red Sox won using these, philosophies in 2004, when the White Sox won in 2005, just the very next year, they were very much champions of the idea of playing small ball, playing, with the fundamentals, and everything. And hey, it worked for them. It's great, whatever.
Right.
You can't argue with success, but like there's a number of times in the book where they talk about the White Sox, and every time they do, they make them sound like a bunch of idiots, and it kind of breaks my heart. But what can you do?
No sympathy considering my team of choice that I've now walked away from is run by a team of crack-smoking monkeys, so far as I can tell. So, okay, so in terms of a film, though, like it's so fascinating because this is something that I watch and I really liked, but I can't tell whether I liked it because I know the source. Like, did I like it more because I know the source material and I can fill in those gaps and understand where they're working from? Or is it something where maybe I enjoy it less than I should because I know that source material? Like, am I hampered by that source material coming into it? But I keep coming back to it. Just has, and you called it out. Like, it's not that I don't care about his daughter or his relationship with his daughter. It's just that this is not that type of movie. Or when he's sitting there talking with his ex-wife and her current husband, that's
played by
not...
Spike Jones, by the way.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. He did a very good job. But it doesn't seem salient to... Like, this would have been a much more energetic, engaging movie, in my opinion, if they had poured that emotion. Like, when it was him fighting with the scouts, that's engaging. That really, the movie's alive at that point. Or when you find out that he can't watch the games, and he's got his little white box, and he turns it on, and he turns it off, and he turns it on, and he turns it off. That's a character thing, and you can address his past just by having them address his past without the flashbacks, without going back to those things. So there's a part of me that, if I had the time or the inclination, would almost be interested to like try to recut this, to remove some of those scenes. And I think that's what I love about it, is I can see it playing in my mind without those moments. And that's what I really enjoy about it. Because I think Brad Pitt's great. I think Jonah Goldberg's great. I really do. And I thought that, it's so interesting to me because I think this is just another performance where Brad Pitt, when he first comes on screen, you're conscious for the first 5 minutes, that's Brad Pitt, that's Brad Pitt, that's Brad Pitt. But then as the movie progresses, he's Billy Beane. You accept it. He manages to overcome a hurdle quicker in the course of a film than like a Clooney does. Clooney, it's a lot harder for me to shake whether it's Clooney in that film or not. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the original movie, I think, or the original idea for the movie, I think, is much more in line with what you're talking about. I mean, you're right about like the stuff with the daughter. It's almost like the anti, Moneyball in a sense, because, his whole thing is like personality doesn't really, matter.
Right.
These individual quirks, it's all about just the stats and sort of turning these people into commodities and everything. And, okay, so originally it was Soderbergh. Steven Soderbergh was supposed to direct it.
Really?
Yeah.
Why didn't he?
That's a good question. Well, I know exactly the answer to the question, because, they give it to Soderbergh, and Soderbergh's like, okay. And like Steven Zalian, who's credited along with Aaron Sorkin with the script, like he had written the script, which I imagine was pretty close to what we see on the screen. And Soderbergh cast Brad Pitt, or Brad Pitt was a producer already or whatever, but, the two of them, they've made a bunch of movies together. So, that was clear that was going to happen. And Soderbergh went in and rewrote the script and basically modified it so that it would be 100% accurate to reality. Like, they talked about how, like, there was a line of dialogue where it was, like, a little joke, about, like, Scott Hatterberg playing first base, and someone said, like, like there's, like, a little kid, off to the side, and he, like, fields a grounder, and they're like, maybe we should get him to play first base or something like that. And, Soderbergh was like, I'm cutting that out of the movie because no one ever said that. Like, that kind of thing. But then he was taking it much, much further. He had Brad Pitt cast as Billy Bean. Essentially, everyone else in the movie was going to be played by themselves. He had cast all of the original Oakland A's. He had cast Art Howard, the manager, as himself, and they were all going to basically reenact what happened that season. He was shooting it in Oakland. He was going to be using like Forrest Gump technology for the video footage for the few people who he couldn't get, all that stuff. And, these people who are all non-professional actors, someone who, people who like Soderbergh had been working with a lot at that time in various movies like The Girlfriend Experience and Bubble, they were essentially not even going to be given scripts, I don't think. They were just going to say like, well, you know what you said in this scene in your actual life, just do that, just say what you said to this guy, that kind of thing.
Wow.
And they were all set to go. This was happening. It was going to start shooting on a Monday. And on the Friday before, the studio said, I can't believe we're actually spending $65 million on this essentially experimental film about baseball, which will have no, value in foreign markets, blah, 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 blah. This cannot happen. And they fired Soderbergh. And that's when they hired Aaron Sorkin to come in, rewrite the script, and then they hired Bennett Miller, who had just made Capote, to come in and direct it. And this is what we got.
You know what, though? Those extra scenes with his wife and his daughter and those sorts of things suddenly make a lot more sense because this does need to play in markets where doesn't need to, but they want this to play well in markets where baseball isn't the thing that it is to American culture historically.
Yeah.
And so, if they don't have that in there, wow, that makes it an even more Hollywood decision, like, quote unquote, even more Hollywood decision. And that's fascinating. And the thing is, I can't fault them for it.
No, you can't fault them for it. I mean, from a business standpoint, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I don't know. And in some ways, I'd be like, okay, you have an Oscar-winning filmmaker who's doing this. Trust him. But, I can also see, what they were thinking. And I guess as a result of this, just two little things, a little side note or whatever, but Soderbergh being super cool, if you ask me, he was like, okay, I'm fired, which means my entire crew is fired. I have a bunch of people who are getting ready to go to work on Monday who are now out of a job. This can't happen. So he said, to his producers, his agents or whatever, like, I need to find a script as soon as humanly possible that I can direct just so that I can employ all of these people who were laid off because of me. And the script that he ended up shooting was Haywire, which is a great movie. Similar to his idea for Moneyball in that he cast Gina Carano, who's a mixed martial artist, as like a spy, essentially kind of like a James Bond character, and got her to beat up a bunch of. It's almost like the reverse of that, where you had like Brad Pitt as like the star, surrounded by a bunch of non-actors. Here you have Gina Carano, a non-actor, as the star, and he surrounded her with a bunch of huge names like Ewan McGregor, Michael Fassbender, Channing Tatum, Michael Douglas, And anyway, we got that movie. We would have never gotten Haywire if Soderbergh hadn't been fired from Moneyball. But also, I really, really, really think that the movie that he released just a month before Moneyball came out, Contagion. Like, if you watch that movie, if you watch the way it plays, if you watch how they talk about a whole bunch of really technical stuff and don't bother trying to explain it to the audience and just rely on the intelligence of the audience to pick up on what's going on and understand these concepts and everything, I really, really think that Contagion was basically his version of Moneyball. Like, that's what he was planning on doing with Moneyball. That's just my personal opinion. But
Okay. See, I think the movie looks fine too, and stuff like that. Everything you're saying about Soderbergh is the film fan part of me who still doesn't know Soderbergh terribly well. To yours, I know that's another long-term project of yours has turned me into a Soderbergh fan too. But that's fascinating to me. But I can tell you that this film, at the very least, is good enough, and the book Moneyball is good enough. I'm now intrigued to the point of where I want to watch baseball just so I can pick a team that does this method and a team that doesn't do this method and like track them both through the season. And that's one of the interesting things that's teased out in this film, as well as of course in the book, is the people that do dismiss it as, oh, they're a bunch of cranks. Oh, baseball's about intuition. Like one of the agents in the film is like, it's about intuition. It's about your gut. It's not just about nerdy number stuff that's there and stuff. But it doesn't mean, I think that the only people this really threatens, in all honesty, are the scouts.
Yeah.
Because the scouts become kind of pointless.
Yeah.
You know, like the scouts should be going and seeing how he interacts with the team. Like you can get the stats. They shouldn't care about how he looks, how the player looks when he's out on the baseball diamond. He should be watching him when he walks into the dugout when something bad happens. He should be watching him when he walks out to the parking lot after he's had a good game or a bad game, or asking people who are staff at the stadium, does he treat people well? What does he do on the holiday? You know, like that sort of thing. Like scouts should be shifting their focus to being almost like private investigators to find out about the guy's personal life as opposed to his performance on field.
Yeah, that scout in the movie, from I've read, he is an actual scout who basically thinks that, you know, the idea of Moneyball is ridiculous. Like he's basically playing himself in that movie, you know.
Wow.
He thinks it's crazy. And but you know, there's definitely that. I mean, you're right, you know, and there's that line. There's a number of lines in this movie or scenes in this movie that I like really take to heart as sort of like almost like personal philosophies, you know. But there's that scene where, you know, he says like adapt or die, you know. You've got to change your philosophy on things or whatever in order to continue to succeed. And you know, that's I think, you know, sort of like key to all of this. I mean, I think that you're absolutely right that it's threatening, you know, a certain type of person who is employed by the industry, and that's why they're so resistant to it. I mean, I certainly saw it in, you know, my industry, or still see it in my industry. And, you know, you got to adapt or die. I mean, that's just kind of how it goes. But yeah, there is a movie out which really is sort of the anti-Moneyball. It's called The Trouble with the Curve. Have you seen this?
Wait a minute. I haven't
Clint
seen
Eastwood?
it. Yes, that is very, very, okay. I remember seeing the ads for it and thinking that looks terrible. Is it terrible?
Yeah, it's terrible. You know, well, I think my review at the time is the trouble with the curve is that it hangs out over the plate and is, you know, very easy to hit for a home run because it's super duper obvious. Like it's such basic filmmaking. And yeah, the whole idea, the whole point of the movie, spoilers for Trouble with the Curve, is like, you may think that you know what you're doing with your statistics and everything, but there's nothing, none of that can compare to, you know, an actual experienced scout who can go out there and hear the way that his curveball sounds and tell from that he's not going to succeed at the big league level or whatever it is, you know.
So it's a superhero movie? He has really good hearing?
I mean, you can hear things like that, but, you know, is it going to stand up to, you know, they leave a lot of stuff. They leave a lot of stuff out that doesn't help their point in order to make their point, and it's kind of dumb.
But see, this
dumb.
is, and the thing is, this is going to sound really weird, but stay with me on this one, okay?
Mm-hmm.
The thing with that type of point of view that always fascinates me is when people feel threatened, as it were, by, oh, this is a scientific explanation for this sort of thing. And let me bring it into the nerd universe, because that's, of course, where our brains work a lot of the time. A lot of people rejected the idea of midichlorians in Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
They're like, oh no, the Force is, you can be born nowhere and know instantly and be a superpowered person with nothing and no training. Hey, that's how it works. But Lucas, of course, says, oh, well, there are midichlorians, and this explains why some people are stronger in it, some people aren't as strong in it, that sort of thing. And people say, oh, well, that takes away the magic of it. It doesn't take away the magic of it. It just means that you figured out how the magic works. It's like figuring out how, a flower grows or something like that. That's still, like when you think about the odds against that thing happening or being that thing, that's still a humbling, awesome sort of experience and idea of somebody who can go up and has a good enough eye to read a picture and the pitcher's body language to know whether I couldn't do that. I could, you could put me up there 1,000 times. I feel like the ball is coming. I can't sit there and like look at, oh, that's a curve. Like if you throw a ball at me, I can't sit there and be like, that's a curve. I shouldn't swing. Oh, that's going to be outside of the plate and stuff like that. And so this scientific stuff, this Moneyball stuff, all it does is it just says, these are the people that figured out the magic, and they have the magic, but this is the science that explains their magic. And that's totally cool with me. Like that totally works.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, I think I agree with your point on the whole. I think where I would disagree with the midichlorian thing would be that the idea is like sort of like the message of the movie is like, to, let's say, kids, like anybody could be a Jedi. And when you take that away, then...
You don't take that away, though. You really don't. It's just, I think that obviously, there's a whole other bigger conversation, but the whole thing with midichlorians is simply the fact that, it's an easy explanation for there are some people who are born more gifted in it. It doesn't mean that somebody can't be a Jedi, because Qui-Gon even says it's in all living things. Okay. And so somebody can be a Jedi, they're just not going to be Anakin. Or maybe they're a really wise Jedi and their skill is that they can, see the curveball, but, the super Jedi, the person who has a more natural... I mean, anybody... Let me actually put it into a martial arts sort of thing, right? If you take somebody who has an athletic... tendency, good balance, all of that stuff, they can be an incredible martial artist out of the gate, right? They have that natural skill, but they still need training to be any good. Then you take somebody who's maybe a little stocky, not as, naturally fit as them, and that person works their tail off. They can be every bit as good and every bit as lethal, just in a different way than that person who has the natural gifts coming out of the gate. The hard work can still get you to that point. It's just going to be harder for you to get there. And that is, that's why I think that like being dismissive of the midichlorians and stuff like that, it doesn't mean that somebody can't get there without hard work. It just means it's going to be more of a task for them to get to that point.
Okay. All right. That's fair.
So you came for the Moneyball and you left with the midichlorians.
Yeah.
There you go. So if anybody wants to commiserate with you, Mike, directly about how I somehow managed to hijack a baseball conversation into something about Jedi, where can they find you online?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K, or you can also find me on Trek.fm doing a show called The Edge, and also another show on Trek.fm called Stage 9 with You.
That's right. I'm over on Trek FM with you doing Stage 9, and then you can find me back here on the Nerd Party Network co-hosting Aggressive Negotiations with Matthew Rushing, and then in my copious amounts of spare time co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig. And if you want to harass me online, just look for Kessel Junkie. That's where I am everywhere. So thank you for joining us on this journey of Moneyball and midichlorians, and we will catch you next time on Great Shot Kid. And this time, get the gluten-free cereal.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.